The interrogation room was cold, as it always was, but despite the chill, Edwin Taller glistened with sweat, his pale, doughy skin catching the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights above. I hated him instantly. He was massive in every sense of the word, a balding, sweaty orb of a man in a dress shirt 2 sizes too small. The tight buttons strained against his jiggling gut as he fiddled nervously with the handcuff around his wrist, his sausage-like fingers tugging at the metal. His forearm left a damp stain on the table, a puddle of condensation pooling beneath the skin pressed against the cold steel. The department had been circling Taller for months. A series of tips, disturbing whispers around St. Clair, and a digital trail of depravity had led us here. He wasn't your average predator. There was something wrong about him, something even his countless priors couldn't fully explain. He was caught skulking around playgrounds, his car parked too long outside the middle school. Locals claimed to have seen him wandering the streets at night, squeezed into an ill-fitting private school uniform, whispering about new friends and bright beginnings. The sick bastard had a reputation, and tonight we finally had him. But this wasn't just another arrest. This wasn't just about digital evidence, explicit messages, or fake profiles. This was about the girl, the one we'd pulled from his filthy apartment earlier that morning, barely conscious, her frail body splayed out on a stained mattress. She was young, emaciated, her gray-tinged skin cold to the touch. She hadn't woken up yet. "Edwin," I growled, my hand slamming onto the table with enough force to make him flinch. His flabby form jiggled like a bowl of jelly. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and watery. "You're done. We've got you dead to rights." I spat. "Your messages, the pictures, the girl. You want to rot in a cell until the day you die, fine. But if you've got any hope of making this easier on yourself, now's the time to talk. Who is she? Where did she come from?" Taller's lips quivered as he stared at the floor. His breathing quickened, wheezing out of his slack jaw in a staccato rhythm. "She's still asleep, then," he muttered, his voice almost too soft to hear. "What did you say?" Taller's head snapped up, his beady eyes locking onto mine. "She hasn't woken up? You didn't take precautions?" "What precautions?" I demanded, leaning forward. He shook his head violently, sweat flying from his scalp. "Her eyes, her mouth, you have to keep them covered, restrained. If she wakes up, we're all going to die." I barked out a humorless laugh. "You threatening me now, you fat piece of shit?" Taller leaned forward, desperation etched across his face. "This isn't a threat. It's a warning. You don't understand what you're dealing with. She's not from here. She's not human." I felt my stomach churn, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing my doubt. "You're out of your mind. Her name is Serlana," he whispered, as if the name itself carried weight. "And she's not alone. Her mother, she'll come for her." "Her mother," I repeated, incredulous. Taller nodded. "She's already on her way. When Serlana wakes up, she'll call to her. And when her mother comes, she'll bring death with her." I slammed my fists onto the table, leaning in so close I could smell the sour tang of sweat on his skin. "Enough with the cryptic bullshit. Who is she? Where did you find her?" Taller swallowed hard. "I didn't find her. She found me." And then he started talking. Taller's story was almost too absurd to believe. He claimed they'd met online, on some obscure forum dedicated to strange art. It started with a comment on a drawing, something grotesque yet mesmerizing. A naked girl, her limbs elongated, her face hauntingly alien. "She messaged me first," he said, his voice trembling. "Her profile picture, it wasn't just black. If you stared long enough, you could see something, like a void, like it was staring back at you. At first, he thought she was just another lonely teenager looking for attention, but her messages were strange, filled with words that didn't make sense, descriptions of a home that didn't exist. She said her house was cold," he continued, "made of concrete and shadows. She said her mother was struggling with the coric. She spoke of creatures called skrells that infested the walls. It was nonsense, but I couldn't stop talking to her. I couldn't stop looking at her. He described the photos she sent him, blurry at first, then horrifyingly clear. Her gray skin, her sunken eyes rimmed with yellow, her teeth jagged and too many for her mouth. I knew she wasn't normal, he admitted, but I didn't care. I wanted her. Eventually, she asked him to meet. She gave him an address, an abandoned cemetery outside of town. I thought it was a game, he said, his voice cracking. But when I saw her, I knew she wasn't lying. She wasn't human. He described her crawling out of the shadows, her limbs bending in unnatural ways. And then the rumble, the presence. I didn't see her mother clearly, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Just a shape, a massive, shifting thing. It smelled like blood and earth, like the jungle. Tyler had done the unthinkable. He'd taken Serlana, subdued her, and fled. I thought I could keep her, he said, tears streaming down his face. I thought I could love her, but now she's awake, and her mother's coming. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. It was Nielsen, my partner at the hospital. His voice was a frantic whisper. Tony, she woke up. The girl, Serlana, she's screaming. And her mother, oh God, Tony, she's here. The line went dead. Tyler stared at me, his face pale with terror. You didn't listen. Now they'll kill us all. Before I could stop him, the lights flickered. The ground rumbled. And somewhere in the distance, a wail, long, piercing, and otherworldly, filled the air. Serlana had called her mother, and she had answered. The walls of the precinct trembled as the wailing sound grew louder, more inhuman with every second. I clenched my fists, heart hammering in my chest as I stared at Tyler, the pale, bloated man whose actions had unleashed this nightmare. Detective, he rasped, his voice cracking with fear. You have to let me out of here. I can help you. I know how to stop her. You've done enough? I growled, my voice barely steady. This is on you, Edwin. The rumbling intensified. A shadow shifted in the hallway outside the interrogation room, impossibly large and writhing, as though it were alive. A scent wafted in, wet earth, iron, and something raw, like rotting flesh. And then I heard it, a soft tapping on the metal door. Tony, a voice whispered. Not just any voice, Nielsen's. My partner. Alex, I called back, stepping closer to the door, my gun drawn. Tony, the voice repeated. It was softer now, weaker. Open the door. It's me. But it wasn't Nielsen. I knew that. Still, I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the door handle. Behind me, Tyler whimpered, his chair scraping against the floor as he pressed himself into the far corner of the room. Don't open it, he screamed. That's not your partner. That's her. The tapping grew louder, faster, frantic. Tony, the voice crooned again, now distorted and hollow. I took a step back, raising my weapon as the door burst inward with a deafening crash. Standing in the doorway was Serlana, but she wasn't the girl we'd pulled from Tyler's apartment. Her gray skin had darkened, mottled with black veins that pulsed like living things. Her limbs were impossibly long, her fingers ending in sharp, claw-like tips. Her mouth stretched wider than humanly possible, revealing jagged, uneven teeth that dripped with a black, viscous fluid. And her eyes, those yellow, glowing orbs, locked onto mine with an intensity that froze me in place. Behind her, the shadow loomed, a colossal, shifting mass of darkness that pulsed and writhed like it was alive. Tendrils of smoke-like matter stretched out, curling around the doorway as the creature, her mother, began to take shape. Detective, Serlana said, her voice a guttural, raspy echo. You shouldn't have taken me from him. I raised my gun, aiming at her center mass. Stay back, I shouted, my voice shaking. Serlana tilted her head, her wide mouth curling into a smile that sent chills down my spine. You think that will stop us? Behind her, the shadow surged forward, slamming into the doorway with enough force to send cracks spidering through the walls. I opened fire, The shots rang out, deafening in the small room. Each bullet struck Serlana, but instead of blood, the black fluid poured from her wounds, hissing and smoking as it hit the floor. She didn't flinch, didn't stumble. She just kept smiling. The tendrils of the shadow creature reached for me, snaking through the air with horrifying speed. I dove to the side, barely avoiding their grasp as they slammed into the interrogation table, shattering it into splinters. Taller screamed, a high-pitched, guttural sound that was cut short as one of the tendrils wrapped around his neck. He thrashed and flailed, his massive body lifted off the ground like a rag doll. "Mother doesn't forgive," Serlana said, her voice dripping with malice. I scrambled to my feet, searching for anything that could help me. My eyes landed on the sprinkler system in the ceiling. "Taller," I shouted, desperation in my voice. "What stops her? How do we stop them?" He gurgled, his face turning purple as the tendril squeezed tighter. "You can't," he choked out. "She wants you." I had no choice. I aimed at the sprinklers and fired. The room was instantly drenched in a torrent of icy water, the sudden spray causing the shadow creature to recoil with an ear-splitting shriek. Its tendrils writhed violently, releasing Taller, who crumpled to the ground in a wet, gasping heap. Serlana's smile faltered, her glowing eyes narrowing as she turned her gaze back to me. "You'll regret that," she hissed. Before I could react, the shadow surged forward, enveloping her completely. The creature grew larger, more defined, its form towering over me now, almost humanoid in shape but with limbs that stretched and twisted unnaturally. And then it spoke, a voice that wasn't a voice, a sound that reverberated in my skull, drowning out my thoughts. "You've taken what is ours," it said, each word a dagger in my mind. "Now we will take everything from you." The shadow lunged, and I braced myself for the end. But then, something unexpected happened. Taller, coughing and choking on the floor, crawled forward, clutching a small object in his hand. A lighter. He flicked it on, the tiny flame dancing in the dim light. "Not today," he wheezed, holding it up to a canister of pepper spray he'd grabbed from my belt. The explosion was instant. Fire engulfed the room, the heat intense enough to singe my eyebrows as I was thrown backward. The shadow creature screamed, its form writhing and dissipating in the flames. When the chaos subsided, the room was in ruins. Smoke filled the air, and the acrid smell of burnt flesh lingered. Taller lay motionless on the floor, his body charred and broken. Serlana was gone, but the shadow, her mother, wasn't. As I stumbled out of the precinct, the wailing began again, louder this time, echoing through the streets. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The night was alive with chaos. Sirens screamed in the distance, merging with the bone-chilling wails of Serlana's mother. The air outside the ruined precinct hung heavy with ash and smoke, a coppery tang of blood seeping into every breath I took. This wasn't a nightmare. This was real, and it wasn't over yet. I stumbled down the crumbling steps, clutching my side where a jagged piece of debris had grazed me in the explosion. Behind me, the remnants of the precinct stood silent, an ominous void where life had once been. But the wails? They were getting louder. The creature wasn't dead. I'd bought myself time, seconds, maybe minutes, but this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about stopping this, for good. My squad car sat where I'd left it, half submerged in the crumbling pavement. I yanked the door open, nearly ripping it off its hinges in my desperation. The radio crackled to life, static, then a voice. "Detective Brand New," it said, low and otherworldly, dripping with mockery. It wasn't her. It wasn't the mother. It was Serlana. "Running won't save you," she continued, her voice an eerie blend of childlike innocence and guttural menace. "You took me. You tried to keep me. Now I've taken everything from you." I snatched the radio from its holder. "Where are you?" I demanded, the words coming out as a growl. "Where's your mother?" "She's everywhere," Serlana whispered, a cruel laugh bubbling under her words. "And soon, so will I." Before I could respond, the radio erupted into static, then silence. The wailing had stopped, and that terrified me more than anything. I knew where this was going to end before I even turned the car key. The old cemetery outside St. Clair, the place where Taylor had first met Serlana. If there was any way to stop this, it would be there. The drive was short, but it felt like an eternity. The road twisted and turned through dense, lifeless woods, the headlights cutting through the suffocating darkness. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a harbinger of doom. Finally, the cemetery loomed into view. The wrought iron gates stood open, twisted and bent like they'd been ripped apart by something far larger than human hands. The air was different here, heavier, colder. It felt like stepping into another world, one that didn't belong to us. And then I saw her. Serlana stood in the center of the cemetery, her frail, elongated form silhouetted against the pale light of the moon. Her gray skin shimmered unnaturally, her wild hair framing those glowing yellow eyes that bore into me. Behind her, the shadows shifted and pulsed. The mother, the creature was a towering mass of darkness, tendrils writhing and twisting as it hovered behind its child. Its form was more defined now, humanoid, but impossibly large, its face a void of shifting blackness. "You came," Serlana said, her smile stretching unnaturally wide. "You didn't run." "I'm glad." I stepped forward, gun in hand, though I knew it wouldn't do me any good. "This ends here," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. "Does it?" she asked, tilting her head. "Do you even know what we are? What we've done? This isn't just about me, detective. It's about you." I narrowed my eyes, gripping the gun tighter. "What the hell are you talking about?" She laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You humans, so blind, so small. You think you're the hunters, the ones in control. But you've always been the prey." The shadows surged forward, the mother advancing with a low, guttural growl that shook the earth beneath my feet. Then I saw it, a glint of something in the shadows behind Serlana. Taylor had mentioned the mother's connection to Serlana's screams. That sound was their weapon, their way of summoning destruction. If I could stop her from using it, maybe, just maybe, I could end this. I dropped the gun and reached into my jacket, pulling out the only thing I had left, a roll of duct tape. Serlana's smile faltered as I lunged forward, the tape unraveling in my hands. She screamed, her mouth opening wide. Too wide, but I was faster. I slammed into her, forcing the tape across her mouth before she could release that unholy wail. She thrashed and clawed at me, her spindly limbs stronger than they looked, but I held firm. The mother roared behind her, the shadows surging toward me with murderous intent. But then, something incredible happened. Serlana stopped moving. Her glowing yellow eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw something other than malice in them. I saw fear. The mother froze, its towering form flickering like a dying flame. Its tendrils writhed violently, lashing out at the ground and tearing through the earth. Serlana's muffled screams grew frantic, her eyes darting to the creature behind her. And then, with a deafening roar, the mother collapsed in on itself, the shadows imploding into nothingness. Serlana fell to the ground, her body limp and motionless. When the dust settled, I stood alone in the cemetery, the cold wind cutting through the silence. Serlana's body lay at my feet, lifeless. Her gray skin had faded to an almost human pallor, her elongated limbs now normal proportions. Whatever she had been, whatever they both had been, was gone. I sank to my knees, exhaustion washing over me. This was over, but the world felt different now, darker, more fragile. As I stared at the lifeless girl before me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something far worse.
Thanks for listening to today's story. Let us know what you think. If you want to hear more scary stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here and welcome you.